fuck? Kok nge-glitch gitu ya? Alright guys, so jadi HP ku rusak guys. Kelindas motor. God damn bro. Habis sahur, HP jatuh, terus kelindas motor. Ya aku harap nih bisa ganti LCD aja lah ya. Gak usah yang aneh-aneh please. Udah jatuh oke. Aduh aku cek. Gak bisa aku perbaiki hari ini juga, belum ada duit aja. Gimana ya? Masa nunggu minggu depan bro perbaikin HP terus dipakai aja. Aku bisa berpindah ke laptop sih sementara. Segala informasi yang butuh di HP itu harusnya WA, Instagram, apa ya? TikTok. Nggak penting sih. Ada berarti kalau gitu aman dia harusnya. Yang depan aja. Yang depan kita perbaikin HP. Mungkin hari ini tuh praktikum animasi dan desain itu yang kayak aku bakal setup sih. Film. Habis itu baru aku bisa hari ini mulai hari ini Sabtu sama Minggu itu aku full ngerjain Singapore Hackathon sama Live Scraper. Nah untuk masalah NLP tadi gimana ya? Harus gak aku terima ya? Terima ya.
Which happens after we've yanked text.
Sorry lah. Hampir aku minum. Loh. Sampai sudah habis ini sudah. Tahu. Sedang pengen. Pengen capek. Kalau makanya main pagi-pagi. Hmm. Oh. Ya. Nah. Oh.
We give it a description, which just helps us know, hey, this is what it is in case. We give it a description, which just helps us know, hey, this is what it is in case you forget later. We have a group, and this helps us prevent duplicate listeners. If you've used event listeners before and you call something like registering an event listener twice, you end up running the code twice, which is not what we want to do, and groups help prevent that. And lastly, we have our callback, which actually says, hey, after we've had and those keys. So these two are magical about what's happening in the key map. If we ran lua vim.diagnostic.goToNext and we called this function from the lua command line, we're going to have the exact same experience as if we had typed those keys. So these two things are exactly the same. It's just about adding them to your fingertips instead of to the command line. Now that we're able to add functionality to our keystrokes, another important feature is being able to add functionality to when particular of the way that we want it to work. So a very simple one would be something like, let's say we have an error in our code. I don't have a function called ASDF. What I can do is in normal mode, I can press right bracket D, and that's going to call the function vim.diagnostic.goToNext. And when I do that, so I'm going to press right caret D, my cursor will move to that line and display the diagnostics or error messages for that line. Each of the key maps works exactly the same way, where we specify the mode, the left-hand side, which is the keys we're going to press, the right-hand side, which is the keys or functions that will be executed, and then we pass some options to do things like giving it a description, making a buffer local, or more, which you'll see later throughout the configuration. And just to be clear, there's nothing magical about what's happening in the key map. If we ran lua vim.diagnostic.goToNext, and we called this function from the Lua command line, we're going to have the exact same experience as if we had typed those keys. So these two things are exactly the same. It's just about adding them to your fingertips instead of to the command line. Now that we're able to add functionality to our keystrokes, another important feature is being able to add functionality to when particular events are fired by NeoVim. This is really similar to something like event listeners in JavaScript, but we call them auto commands in NeoVim because they automatically run some commands. In this case, the first one that I want to show you is what gives us this functionality that if we do something like YAP and we yank around the paragraph, this functionality that if we do something like YAP and we yank around the paragraph, we get that little highlight which shows the region that we just yanked. This is really helpful because sometimes it's not clear. I yank this line, or I yank J, or I yank till Y.
What is here?
It's really nice to get that little bit of feedback that shows you what was previously yanked. So how does this happen? The first thing is that we have to tell NeoVim what event we want to listen to. That's this text yank post, which happens after we've yanked text. We give it a description, which just helps us know, hey, this is what it is in case you forget later. We have a group, and this helps us prevent duplicate listeners. If you've used event listeners before and you call something like registering an event listener twice, you end up running the code twice, which is not what we want to do, and groups help prevent that. And lastly, we have our callback, which actually says, hey, after we've had this event, please execute this code, or this command in a sense. And that's what all the commands are. We have a few more throughout the configuration that you'll see, but all of them follow this general pattern of registering to an event and then calling some particular callback. Everything we've done up until now has been useful in the base default configuration for NeoVim. It doesn't install anything else. But there's a lot of really awesome and exciting plugins and people working throughout the NeoVim ecosystem, creating really helpful tools for you to be more productive and, in my opinion, have more fun. So to do that, we're going to install a plugin manager. You don't have to worry exactly what each of these lines do, but ultimately this just checks to see if you have lazy nvim installed, and if not, it installs it for you. This is how we get that startup sequence that just magically starts bootstrapping itself. So this is sort of the bootstrapping of the plugin manager, and after we bootstrap that, then we can start configuring and installing the plugins. Now that NeoVim has lazy installed, we can use it to update, install, and check the status of different plugins. So we can run lazy and we get this nice menu. We can check different things like installing plugins if there are any not installed. We can check for updates by pressing capital U. We can check to profile to see how long it took for Lazy to start up. Each of these items is explained in more detail inside of Help Lazy, but the main one that you'll probably want to do as you start experimenting is just Lazy Update, which allows you to get the updated plugins from your configuration. You can always roll back by snapshotting or using the other tools available inside Lazy to keep your config safe and secure while you're experimenting with new ideas. There's a variety of ways that we can specify what plugins we'd like Lazy to install. The simplest way is to just pass an owner and repo link, like tpope/vim-sleuth. What this looks for is the GitHub repo under this owner and repo. If you'd like to pass something that's outside of GitHub, just give the entire URL and Lazy will download it from there. Many NeoVim plugins use a setup function to control both when and how a plugin is loaded.
AI Canva selalu siap bantu kamu mendesain. Cukup ketik tag @canva untuk masukan dan saran desain.
Because of how widespread this idiom is, Lazy includes support for this out of the box. The simplest way to do this is to use the ops keyword. And if you pass an empty table, that's like saying, hey, plugin, please load yourself with your default configuration immediately when NeoVim starts. To override the default configuration with the values you want, simply place those in the ops table. In this case, we're configuring get signs with what signs we would like to show in the gutter. But plugins can be configured with more than just tables. Instead, we can actually run Lua code whenever a plugin is actually loaded. Fortunately for us, this isn't VS Code, it's just Lua code, and we can do whatever we want. Lazy makes it very easy to control when and how the plugin's loaded, just like we talked about with setup. Because we can delay loading of a plugin to some later event, we can then delay the execution of the configuration until later as well. This helps improve startup time and also helps it so that if you're experimenting with multiple different plugins, you can easily enable or disable them without having to rewrite your entire config. In this case, we wait to load WitchKey until the very lazy event, and once it's loaded, we call the setup and register additional key maps. This is very helpful for separating the WitchKey config from the rest of your configuration. Plugins can also specify dependencies. Dependencies are actually just the same kind of tables that we've been building up to now. So you can use any of the same keys like ops, config, or any of the new ones that we'll explain as we go in both your root or your dependency plugin specifications. This provides really powerful configuration options for plugins that sort of work together to provide a really powerful experience. And here's where we get to the first sort of larger plugin configuration that we have within Kickstart. This is for a fuzzy finder called Telescope, which was made by a super cool software developer who makes great YouTube videos and would...
What the fuck, John?
I could just hit enter since I have it selected, which will bring up the lazy.mvim UI. In this video, we'll be looking at the Lazy Vim setup for NeoVim, powered by lazy.nvim, which is a modern plugin manager. Lazy Vim is a great way to get started with an ID-like environment, and it also has great ways to extend and modify how it's configured.
The type configuration have changed.
LazyVim also has its own documentation site, which is a nice addition to its GitHub repo. So let's begin. We'll go to the installation section of the site. And first, we'll back up our current NeoVim setup in case we want to revert back later. And then we'll clone the LazyVim starter repo to our local machine. And then we'll remove the .git folder so you can add it to your own repo later. Okay, so now you should be able to start NeoVim and watch the magic happen. The lazy.nvim experience is very nice and interactive, especially in this case where you're setting up an environment for the first time. And by the end, you have your new LazyVim version of NeoVim all set up. It's a good idea by the end, especially in this case where you're setting up an environment for the first time.
You do not.
And by the end, you have your new LazyVim version of NeoVim all set up. It's a good idea at this point to run the check health command to verify everything is okay. So I'm a bit zoomed in for this recording, but if I zoom out a little, you'll see something more like what you would see. A dashboard for quick actions you might want when you first open NeoVim. Okay, let's quit and switch to the folder where our new LazyVim configuration lives. And relaunch NeoVim. A good thing to know about LazyVim is that it comes pre-installed with the Which key. This plugin allows you to hit the leader key, space by default, and it'll show a list of key maps for you to explore. This is handy especially when the key maps might be new to you, or you infrequently use some of them. So in our case, let's type E, which will open Neotree at our root directory. And let's navigate to the Lua config folder and open up the lazy.lua file. Then we'll toggle Neotree off with leader E again. Since we typed the key map quickly, the which key overlap doesn't appear, which is a nice touch. You'll notice that several plugins and language servers aren't installed until they're needed, which is great for initial performance. Let's open up Mason, which is a way to manage language servers, linters, formatters, and more with leader CM. So the installed language servers does not include TypeScript, which is something that I regularly use. I could install it using Mason, but there are other settings I would need to manually set up. Thankfully, however, LazyVim has a few modules already coded that include the TypeScript settings already wired up for us. So let's uncomment lines 14 through 16 to include TypeScript and JSON support, along with the mini animate plugin, which I'll show you what that does later. And we'll save our changes and quit NeoVim. Now let's switch back to our previous TypeScript project with cd-, and then start NeoVim. On launch, you'll see that lazy.nvim is installing some plugins that were required by the lines we uncommented earlier. Alright, now let's start to navigate our TypeScript project. We'll type space, our leader key, to engage which key, then F to find, and then F again to find files. This launches the Telescope plugin that will search for files known by Git. Normally you'd see a preview of these files, so let me zoom out just a tad. And as I search, you can see a preview of the selected file on the right. Let's open the page.tsx file. LazyVim comes pre-configured with the leap.nvim plugin to allow you to easily jump to any location, which is what I'm using here to jump directly to the first styles reference. You might have noticed the cursor animating to the location. Well, that was the mini.animate plugin that we enabled earlier. Since we installed the TypeScript language server, we can now leverage LSP features such as rename. Here we'll rename styles to CSS, and the LSP will intelligently rename the variables as needed. If you press a capital K, it'll show hover documentation showing type information. Let's search for a string across our project. We'll hit leader and then S for search and G for grep from our root directory. And we'll search for John. As before, I'm a bit zoomed in here, so let's zoom out for a more realistic view. Here on the right, you can see a preview of the search results for the match. And let's go to that file. Here we can see some inline linting information coming from the TypeScript LSP. Here we could use the trouble plugin by pressing leader XX to view diagnostics. Then you could jump directly to the issue, and we'll close that panel. And then we can launch some code actions via the TypeScript LSP by pressing leader CA. In this case, we'll just prefix the RAQ variable with an underscore to ignore the warning. If you'd like to change your color scheme, then you could press leader U capital C. And we'll switch to Elf Lord. Then we'll change it back to Tokyo Night. Once you have more than one buffer open, you could toggle between them by pressing leader FB. And Telescope will open with existing buffers and we'll pick page TSX. You could also use the right bracket B to go to the next buffer, and the left bracket B to go to the previous buffer. And you could always use the mouse to click the tabs at the top of the window. There are other ways too, but those are the ones I primarily use. Okay, now let's switch to splits. You could create a vertical split by pressing leader pipe, and create a horizontal split by pressing leader dash. And then you can navigate to the left split with Ctrl H, to the right split with Ctrl L, down a split with Ctrl J, and up a split with Ctrl K. And you can adjust the size of the split with Ctrl up, Ctrl down, Ctrl right, and Ctrl left. Okay, let's close those splits and move along to help. You can bring up a huge list of help pages to search by pressing leader SH. Let's search for to do and see its help page. This help page is about a to-do plugin that LazyVim has installed. Let's exit this help page and take a look. Above our home function, let's add a to-do comment saying, do this or that. Already you can see visually that the to-do comment looks special. Let's switch to the next buffer before pressing leader ST to search for to-dos. And you'll see the to-do from the other file. If we press enter, it'll switch us back over to that buffer to the correct line. Another piece of functionality that you would probably expect from an IDE is auto-completion. Well, LazyVim wires that all up for you as well. If we start typing func, you'll see a list of auto-completions, and one of them is a snippet. So we'll Control N down to that option and hit enter. Then we could fill in the stops along the way. We'll call this say hello, then tab, and change params to message, then tab and make the type a string, and then tab into the body of the function. Now we could type the code of our function. We'll just console.log and print out hello and the message passed to the function, with autocompletes showing up along the way. Then when we use our new function, say hello, we also get autocomplete help and type information to help us again. And here we'll say world. Sometimes you know there's a key map that you want, and which key may just not be cutting it. In that case, you could press leader SK to search key maps. Here we'll type lazy, and you can see that there's a key map for leader L to launch lazy. In this case, I could just hit enter since I have it selected, which will bring up the lazy.mbim UI. Here you might want to sync up your plugins with a capital S, which installs, cleans, and updates all of your plugins. In this case, we have a few updates, LazyVim itself and the indent blank line plugin. You could also press capital P to look at the profile of our plugins. It looks like our total startup time is about 50 milliseconds. You could filter down the list with Control F and only show plugins that are slower than some threshold. We'll enter 10 milliseconds, and here are those plugins. Okay, let's exit and move along. There are several settings that you could toggle on and off. For example, pressing leader UL toggles the UI line numbers off and on. There are several other UI toggles that you could explore yourself. Let's go over to the CSS module and do some global search replace. Here we're going to leverage the Spectre plugin by pressing leader SR to search and replace. Here we'll replace description with the term summary, which has 17 matches. And we'll limit the path to files that end with TSX or CSS, which reduces our matches down to 11. We can view additional help in Spectre by typing the question mark. And let's move this over a little to give some room. And we'll type leader RC to replace the current item. However, I don't want to change the meta tag, so I'll press DD on this line to delete the current item, which means I can replace the rest of the items with leader capital R. Now let's see where we're at and use LazyGit by pressing leader GG. This view is a bit cramped since I'm zoomed in so far for this video, so I'll zoom out slightly, and I'll zoom back. From LazyGit, you can review your work, stage files, commit your work, and so much more. I'm a big fan of LazyGit, so it's a nice feature to be able to launch it directly from NeoVim. Another handy key map is be able to quickly spin up a temporary terminal by pressing leader FT from your root directory. Here I'll just run npm run, which will show a list of available npm scripts that I can run, and I'll just exit when I'm done. Alright, let's quit our TypeScript project for now and transition to extending LazyVim from our initial setup. But before we do, how about subscribing to this channel and liking the video? The stats show that most who watch my videos are not subscribers, but you can change that. Oh, and it'd be nice if you could comment about something you'd like me to cover in future videos. Okay, enough with that. Let's switch back to the NeoVim config directory with cd-, and we'll start adding, editing, and disabling stuff from the base LazyVim config. And let's launch NeoVim and get into it. We'll open up NeoTree and navigate to the Lua config folder and open the options.lua file. This is where you could add your own custom options for NeoVim. You can always reference the documentation on what options LazyVim already provides. In our case, let's set the WinBar for NeoVim, which is content that is displayed at the top of every window, where equals represents a separation point for alignment, M is a modifier flag of the buffer, and F is the path to the file in the buffer. So let's save our file and source it. And now you can see the WinBar in the upper right of the buffer. This might not be super helpful right now, but if you have multiple splits, it could come in more handy. Speaking of splits, let's make a vertical split and open the keymaps.lua file. Here we'll add a new keymap for normal mode, and we'll use the leader.sx keymap that will resume the last telescope picker that happened to be open previously. And we'll make this not recursive and silent. Okay, we'll save this, which will be auto-formatted. Now let's source this file and test it. If we press leader to kick in which key, we can see S to search. But then for the X, there's an empty spot. So we registered the keymap, and it works just fine, but I didn't provide a description. So let's go back and do that. We'll go to the last argument and add a new DESC description entry to the Lua table. And we'll call it resume. Okay, so we'll save again, which formats the file, then we'll source the file again, and if we type leader S, we'll now see our new X with a resume next to it. And sure enough, it still brings up the last telescope picker. There's also an autocommands.lua file where you can register any specific autocommands that you want, but we'll move on to another topic. Instead, let's open up the example.lua file from the plugins folder. This file has a lot of handy examples that you could pull from. None of them are executed because it returns an empty Lua table at the beginning of the file. So now I'd like to show you how to modify the default color scheme of LazyVim. Let's come down to line 11 and we'll grab and till line 21. We'll yank those lines to use in just a little bit. Over in NeoTree, you could press the question mark to get a helpful list of commands. On the plugins folder, we'll press A to add a new file called groovebox.lua. In this file, we'll return a Lua table and paste the lines that we just yanked. The Lua table on line 2 registers the Groovebox theme, and the other Lua table updates the definition of LazyVim and adjusts the color scheme option to Groovebox instead of the default Tokyo Night. Once we save this file, LazyVim is already aware that it's special. If we open up Lazy, you'll see that it's aware that we want Groovebox, but it hasn't been installed yet. And we can press capital I to install the new theme. Now let's quit and restart NeoVim to see the difference. And sure enough, this is the Groovebox theme. Okay, let's try something else. We'll add a new piece of functionality to Telescope. We'll add a file browser picker. So let's add a file-browser.lua file to the plugins folder. And here we'll paste in a snippet that defines the plugin, which is an extension for Telescope. Then we can actually define plugin-specific key maps in the same file under the keys entry. Here we're saying leader S capital B will invoke Telescope using the file browser extension and using the path of the current buffer. And we'll provide a description so that which key works well too. Then we'll register the extension after the plugin loads. So let's save the file. Then we'll open Lazy, and we can see that the plugin isn't installed yet, and you can also see that it recognizes our custom key map, leader S capital B. We'll go ahead and install it with capital I, and quit NeoVim, and restart. And here I'll press leader, then S, then capital B, and voila, there's our Telescope file browser, where we can navigate down into folders and back up. Okay, next let's change this dashboard LazyVim with something a little more custom. For this, we'll create a new file in the plugins folder called alpha.lua. And here I'll paste in a bit of code. So on line 2, we're referencing the existing plugin that LazyVim is already using. The ops function allows us to take the existing options that were defined elsewhere and to tweak them for our purposes. So I'm taking the section header value from the options and setting it to a banner that says NeoVim with my Twitter handle underneath. So we'll save this file, quit NeoVim and relaunch, and hey, a customized dashboard. Okay, so we relaunch and display into folders and back up, custom. For this, we'll create a new file in the plugins folder called alpha.lua. And here I'll paste in a bit of code. So on line 2, we're referencing the existing plugin that LazyVim is already using. The ops function allows us to take the existing options that were defined elsewhere and to tweak them for our purposes. So I'm taking the section header value from the options and setting it to a banner that says NeoVim with my Twitter handle underneath. So we'll save this file, quit NeoVim and relaunch, and hey, a customized dashboard. Okay, so we showed how to get started, how to add your own settings, and how to modify existing settings. Before we conclude, let's show how to disable some features that you may not want from the base LazyVim configuration. For this, we'll add yet another file to the plugins folder called disabled.lua. In this file, let's return a Lua table with an entry that disables the Spectre plugin. Maybe you don't like this plugin, and you'd rather use Telescope, quick fix lists, and CDO updates instead. So let's save this file, quit NeoVim, and relaunch. Now when we launch WitchKey and go into S for search, you will no longer see the R key registered for the Spectre plugin, because it was disabled. I know I showed a lot during this video and it was a bit of a whirlwind, but I hope that you learned something interesting. Believe it or not, there's a whole lot more LazyVim provides that I didn't even show. I highly recommend that you check out the documentation. There's some great stuff in there. And until next time, keep learning. And please leave
Final Another. Boleh dia bahkan nggak paham cak mana.